A cold, silent stretch of ocean, the kind of place where even the waves seem afraid to speak. At dawn, a team of divers descends below the surface, expecting nothing more than a standard recovery dive, maybe a broken engine block. A rusted section of fuselage, the usual fragments left behind by time. But then, through the murky blue, a metallic shape emerges. Sleek, recognizable, legendary. A fighter aircraft that once ruled the skies of world. War II, the P-51 Mustang. Only this one lies twisted on the ocean floor like a sleeping giant, perfectly preserved in the icy depths. The divers hover in stunned silence, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. They approach the cockpit, and that's when the first diver freezes in place. Something inside the aircraft is staring back at him. Something that shouldn't have been there. Something history never recorded in. Something the U.S. military has tried, for decades, to keep hidden from the world. The P-51 Mustang, known as the Cadillac of the sky, wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this remote stretch of coastline. According to military archives, no fighter squadrons were flying in this direction. No combat missions were logged in this grid, and no official crash reports ever mentioned a Mustang going down here. So why was one sitting on the seabed? And why did the interior look untouched, as if the pilot had sealed himself inside just yesterday? As the divers circled the wreck, cameras rolling, every detail grew stranger. The wings were sheared cleanly, as if cut by an impossibly sharp force. The propeller was bent backward, not forward, hinting that the aircraft didn't crash nose first. And the canopy was cracked open just enough to suggest someone escaped or something entered. The team's lead diver, ex-naval recovery specialist, signaled everyone to hold position. He shined his light directly into the cockpit. Dust floated like snow in the still water, and one object small, metallic, and out of place, reflected back. It wasn't a gun. It wasn't equipment. It was something he had only seen once in his entire career, a World War II E-ray encrypted capsule. The kind used for top-secret intelligence transmissions. Only these capsules were never issued to P-51 pilots. Ever. They were exclusive to deep cover operatives and mission couriers. Why would one be inside a fighter plane? Who placed it there? And what message had been so dangerous that someone hid it inside an aircraft that, according to official history, never existed? As the divers prepared to retrieve the capsule, a cloud of sediment suddenly rose, as if something disturbed the water behind them. One diver spun around, nearly dropping his light, convinced he saw movement near the tail section. But when he steadied his breath and looked again, nothing was there, just the silent Mustang resting in its watery grave. Still, each of them felt it. A presence. Something heavy. Watching. They decided to proceed with the recovery, aware that what they were about to uncover would rewrite everything we know about World War II aerial operations. Covert assassination programs, and the shadow war that unfolded far away from official battlefields. The diver reached inside. His hand barely touched the capsule, when another object, something he hadn't noticed before, shifted beneath his glove. It was long, rigid, wrapped in decayed fabric. Not a weapon. Not a tool. Something far more disturbing. And when he pulled it into the light, the entire team gasped. Because this wasn't supposed to exist. Not in a P-51. Not in any fighter. Not in any official record from the war at all. What they found was the first clue to a forgotten mission so classified that even after 80 years, the documents remain sealed. A mission involving rogue scientists, untested biological tech, and a pilot whose name the government erased from every surviving logbook, and the P-51 resting on the seafloor was the last remaining witness to what truly happened. Asterisk beneath the silent veil of the ocean. Far deeper than sunlight could penetrate, the divers descended with a growing sense of unease, their beams slicing through the black. Water in thin white ribbons as the weight of the unknown pressed heavily against their chests. Even the most seasoned among them felt a tan instinctive warning. The kind the human mind rarely experiences unless it is standing on the threshold of something buried. Something forgotten. Something not meant to be disturbed. The currents shifted strangely as they neared the last known coordinates of the lost P-51 Mustang, swirling in patterns that seemed unnaturally deliberate. If the ocean itself was reacting to their presence while the radio static crackled with intermittent bursts that didn't match the usual distortion found at depth. The first diver extended a hand and froze, breath halting inside the mask. Because the outline emerging from the darkness didn't resemble a simple wreck. It looked almost staged, positioned deliberately on the seafloor. Nose buried slightly in the sand. Wings twisted but not destroyed. Cockpit intact, canopy sealed. As though the aircraft had landed instead of crashed, the second diver moved in closer, illuminating the tail section, where the Mustang's serial number long believed, erased by corrosion, stared back at them with shocking clarity. The paint preserved unnaturally, untouched by time, as if the ocean had protected it instead of wearing it down. A chill ran through the team. This wasn't normal. Nothing about this wreck matched the expected damage of a World War II fighter crashing from thousands of feet. Nor did it resemble the destruction caused by impact forces, fuel ignition, or wartime detonation. Something else had happened. Here something unrecorded, unreported, and undeniably strange. When the divers circled the fuselage, their lights revealed deep gashes along the metal skin cuts that were too clean, too precise, too deliberate to be the result of impact or corrosion. One diver floated back in instinctive fear. The marks looked like the aircraft had been sliced open by some unknown tool or force. And then, just as the team approached the cockpit, the water around them hummed with a low vibration, pulsing through their suits, shaking their gear, rattling their tanks as though the ocean floor itself was warning them to turn back. But the divers pushed forward, relentless. Driven by the same irresistible force that had driven the P-51 pilot decades earlier, the need to uncover the truth hiding in the darkness. The first diver's hand reached toward the canopy and stopped. Inside the cockpit, faintly illuminated by the drifting beams of their flashlights, something was visible. Something they did not expect. Something that made every diver's heart hammer violently against their ribs. Every instinct screaming to ascend immediately. Because inside the sealed cockpit was a shape, motionless, perfectly preserved, sitting upright in the pilot's seat as though frozen in time, and then, as the divers hovered in stunned silence, a strange metallic clink echoed through the water. Asterisk, as the divers descended deeper into the frigid, ink-black water, the world above dissolved into a fading shimmer of distant light, replaced by the crushing silence of the lake bed where the P-51 Mustang had slept untouched for more than 8 decades. Its once gleaming aluminum frame, now coated in layers of mud, silt, and time itself. The aircraft resting at an angle that suggested it had impacted violently before sliding into its final resting place. Half buried like a metallic fossil locked in a forgotten grave. The diver's beams sliced through the murky darkness as the shape of the fighter emerged, first a shadow, then a broken outline, and finally the unmistakable silhouette of the legendary Mustang. Its iconic wings still recognizable despite the ravages of time. One snapped clean off, the other bent backward, as though twisted by an invisible hand. The propeller blades curled like melted metal, frozen in the exact moment of catastrophic failure. Even through their thick masks, the divers felt a jolt of awe and unease. This was not just a wreck. It was a preserved moment of violent history. A time capsule sealed in cold water since the firefight's chaos. In desperation of 1944, they approached slowly. Wary of disturbing the fragile sight, the silt swirling in hypnotic spirals around their fins, the cockpit canopy amazingly was still intact, though cracked through the center as if struck by something powerful in the final seconds of flight. A diver wiped away decades of buildup with a gloved hand. And what appeared inside made his pulse spike shapes, objects, fragments. Something that did not match the typical empty wrecks they had seen before. The pilot was gone. That much was clear, but the cockpit was not empty. Something was inside. Something deliberately placed, as if hidden. As the divers exchanged a silent, wide-eyed glance through their visors, They signaled to begin carefully prying the canopy open. Asterisk, the moment the glass shifted. A cloud of trapped air escaped in a ghostly stream of bubbles air from the 1940s. Rising toward the surface for the first time since World War II, the divers steadied their breath, reached inside. And their hands touched, not mud, not debris, but solid objects wrapped in rotting fabric, bound with cord, and wedged into the space behind the pilot's seat. That was the first sign that something was terribly unusual. Pilots were not trained to store cargo there. They were not permitted to smuggle anything aboard, and they certainly did not fly into combat with secret bundles hidden behind their backs. As one diver pulled a package free, the silt cloud thickened, swirling like underwater smoke. The package was shockingly heavy for its size. It's far heavier than equipment or survival supplies. When the diver's glove brushed away the decayed fabric, a metallic glint appeared beneath. He froze. Another diver illuminated it with a flashlight, and the shape became unmistakable. It was not part of the plane. It was not a tool. It was something forbidden, something worth hiding, something that could rewrite everything historians believed about the missing pilot and his final mission. The divers retrieved more bundles, 3, then 4, then 5, each the same weight, each wrapped the same way, each hidden behind the seat with deliberate care. When they opened a cracked leather satchel near the rudder pedals, they found papers still preserved in the cold water pages of a logbook, handwritten notes, coded markings, and sketches that made no sense at first glance. But one detail stood out immediately. Even underwater, the coordinates repeated, underlined, marked with red pencil. Not matching any Allied mission. Not matching the pilot's route. Not matching any approved objective. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And then came the moment that chilled every diver to the core. As one reached beneath the instrument panel, his glove brushed against something rigid, too rigid to be metal, too irregular to be part of the plane. He pulled it out slowly, the silt drifting off like dust off a long-buried relic, and as the shape emerged into the flashlight beam, the divers froze in absolute silence, because what he held was not equipment, not documents, not cargo. It was a skeletal forearm, still partially wrapped in a fragment of flight jacket leather knot belonging to the pilot. There were 2 people aboard this Mustang, but records showed only one pilot launched and one pilot never returned. Yet here, in the cold darkness of the lake bed, was undeniable evidence that someone else had been inside the aircraft. Someone who had been hidden. Someone who had not been recorded. Someone who was never meant to be found. The divers exchanged a series of sharp, urgent hand gestures. This was no longer a simple recovery. This was an investigation into a secret that had survived the war, survived the crash, and survived the lake for nearly a century. And at the center of it all was the P-51 Mustang, holding its final truth in silence, waiting for the world to discover what truly happened in those final, desperate moments in 1944, as the divers hovered in the cold, murky stillness. Shocked by the sight of the skeletal forearm drifting gently in the water like a ghostly remnant of a forgotten truth, they realized instantly that this wreck was not merely a crash site. It was the burial ground of a secret that had been deliberately concealed. A secret so deeply buried that even military archives had avoided it for decades. And as they steadied their breathing and illuminated the interior of the cockpit more thoroughly, the eerie contours of additional human remains became gradually visible. Fragments wedged beneath the seat harness. A portion of a ribcage trapped behind a twisted metal beam, and most unsettling of all, a partial jawbone resting near the oxygen control valve, as though it had been violently torn from the body during the catastrophic impact. Yet the official records for this mission listed only one pilot, one name. One man unaccounted for, but here was physical proof of a second. Unknown passenger who had never been described in reports, never identified in after-action summaries, never acknowledged in wartime documentation. The divers' flashlights flickered across the fuselage interior, revealing that the second individual had not simply stowed away or hidden spontaneously. This person had been intentionally brought aboard, strapped into a space that no passenger should ever occupy. suggesting either a covert rendezvous, an emergency evacuation, or a secret extraction operation. And as the divers exchanged tense gestures, their attention moved back to the mysterious bundles recovered earlier. Heavy metallic objects wrapped in disintegrating cloth. Each weighing far more than standard tools or supplies, their density and shape reminiscent of ingots, containers, or possibly mechanical components. Though the divers were not yet certain, the only way to know for sure was to bring everything to the surface. But before they could proceed, a diver noticed something unusual near the tail section, a narrow access panel that had been deliberately unscrewed before the crash, its bolts loose, its interior compartment exposed. This compartment was never intended for pilot access during flight, and certainly not for storing cargo. Yet inside were more documents, sealed in a waterproof pouch remarkably intact, despite the decades underwater. The divers opened the pouch carefully, and inside they found flight instructions coded. Incomplete and unlike standard Allied mission papers, they also found a small notebook, its cover embossed with the letters WR, an acronym that did not match the known pilot's initials. Each page contained hastily written entries in a mix of English and another language, German, possibly, or a variant unfamiliar to the divers, with sketches of geographical outlines, altitude notes, and series of numbers that looked more like encryption keys than coordinates. Whatever mission this Mustang had been part of, it had not been routine, and it had not been legal. The deeper the divers looked, the more unsettling details they uncovered. The bullet holes in the cockpit canopy did not match the timeline of the crash. The instrument panel had been tampered with before impact. The fuel tanks had been modified to carry additional unknown material, and the oxygen system showed signs of sabotage or emergency modification. This was no ordinary crash. This was a crisis midair, a struggle, a last-minute fight for control at low altitude. The missing pilot of this P-51 Mustang had not merely lost control, he had been engaged in a desperate battle inside the cockpit itself. And then came the most shocking discovery yet. Embedded between the rudder pedals, hidden beneath a tangled mass of wires and rusted metal, the divers found a small metallic box, roughly the size of a soldier's ration tin. Its edges were smooth, machined with precision, and despite being underwater for 8 decades, the box showed almost no corrosion. A diver tapped it lightly, and the dull metallic ring suggested it was made of an alloy stronger than typical wartime. Stellan alloy, not commonly used by Allied engineering units. Carved into the metal were markings, a sequence of numbers, a symbol resembling a double-winged insignia. And a date, June 1944, the same week of the Normandy invasion. Why would a Mustang pilot carry a sealed, tamper-proof container on a mission unrelated to D-Day? Why was there a second unregistered passenger aboard? Why were coordinates in the logbook pointing to locations deep inside German-held territory? Why was the canopy riddled with exit-pattern bullet holes, as though someone inside the cockpit had been shot at close range? The divers now understood. They were not just recovering a plane. They were exhuming a mystery that someone in 1944 never intended anyone to solve, as the team prepared to ascend, each carrying an artifact from the wreck bundles, documents, bones, and the sealed metal box. The lake floor shifted beneath them, a slow settling of silt that sent a billowing cloud upward, shrouding the wreck in a ghostly haze. Through that drifting mist, the P-51 Mustang looked almost alive again. Like a wounded predator crouched at the bottom of the world, its secrets clenched tightly even in death. As the divers kicked upward, ascending through layers of darkness toward the faint halo of sunlight far above, they felt the weight of history literally strapped to their gear, the burden of a truth hidden since the chaos of World War II and in their minds. A question echoed with chilling clarity: what on earth had that pilot been carrying, and who had died beside him inside the cockpit of that Mustang? As the recovered artifacts were lifted from the water and placed gently onto the dive platform, the team surrounded them in a silent semicircle, each person fully aware that what lay before them had the potential to rewrite wartime history. For the bundles that had been so heavy underwater were now revealed to contain long, rectangular objects wrapped in layers of oil-soaked cloth, the fabric so old it peeled apart like wet paper. And when the final layer was removed, the divers froze. Stunned by the unmistakable glint of polished, untouched metal-solid ingots, not of steel or aluminum, but of a rare, the Hidden-City alloy that none of the team recognized instantly. An alloy far too advanced to have been part of standard P-51 equipment. And beside these ingots lay the sealed metallic box, its surface still shimmering strangely, despite the decades spent submerged. The etched double-wing insignia now clearly visible beneath the sunlight, catching the eyes of the divers like an encrypted warning from the past. The box was locked with a mechanism that looked neither American nor German. A small sliding latch and circular dial combination that resembled early prototypes of coded lock systems not found until after the Cold War, and standing beside the artifacts, the lead diver, still dripping lake water, lifted the pouch containing the notebook and coded flight papers, laying them gently across the tail of the recovery boat where warm air and sunlight dried the stiffened pages. And as the words became legible, each line revealed fragments of a narrative asterisk. That made no logical sense. Coordinates deep inside enemy territory. Altitudes that corresponded with stealth reconnaissance routes. Diagrams of structures that did not match any recorded military building of the era. Plus handwritten notes warning of transfer windows, intercept limits. Something referenced repeatedly only by the cryptic title, the Hand Directive. Right! The divers exchanged uneasy looks. This was not the language of a fighter pilot on a routine escort mission. This was the language of covert operatives, of intelligence agents, of shadow missions that took place far beyond what the public was ever allowed to know during the war. And next to these baffling documents lay the remains retrieved from the cockpit, each bone fragment telling a story more disturbing than the last. For forensic patterns suggested that the second skeleton had suffered trauma before the crash, including fractures inconsistent with an aircraft impact and instead resembling close-quarters violence, raising the chilling possibility that whoever this second person was, they may have died in a struggle inside the cockpit itself, a fight that could explain the bullet holes on the inside of the canopy, bullet holes no Allied pilot would ever willingly fire in such an enclosed space unless forced into a desperate choice. And as the divers discussed the implications, the shoreline team called for a full examination of the ingots, noting their exceptional smoothness, weight, and the strange alphanumeric codes engraved onto them, codes resembling serial numbers but not consistent with Allied metallurgy. Catalogs from 1943 or 1944. Codes that instead resembled experimental materials from abandoned or classified research projects, particularly those involving early nuclear science prototypes. And although no one dared voice the suspicion aloud, the unspoken tension in the air suggested that these ingots could be linked to wartime nuclear programs, American, German, or perhaps even something more obscure, because both sides were racing to work nuclear capability in secret labs. In a single Mustang carrying rare alloys and coded documents hinted at the terrifying possibility that the aircraft was part of an unauthorized transfer operation, a movement of materials never intended for public knowledge. But then one of the divers noticed something even more unsettling. Etched faintly into the corner of one ingot was a triangular symbol that matched markings found in the notebook next to sketches of underground bunkers shaped like geometric labyrinths. And as the divers examined it under magnification, the symbol became clearer, revealing a three-part emblem resembling an arrow splitting into two parallel lines, a design that had no known association with U.S. forces or the Luftwaffe, but did appear in obscure research files connected to breakaway scientific units allegedly operating outside both governments, shadow cells rumored to have pursued technology decades ahead of its time, technology so sensitive that entire teams disappeared after the war, absorbed into post-war intelligence programs, or silenced permanently. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the boat and illuminating the metallic surfaces with an almost ominous glow, the divers realized the horrifying scale of what they were holding. This was not simply wreckage from a P-51 Mustang that had gone down in 1944. This was evidence of a clandestine wartime operation encrypted, concealed, and deliberately erased from the record, involving secret cargo, covert passengers, encrypted logs, unknown materials, internal violence in the cockpit, and a pilot who may have been betrayed mid-flight. Yet nothing in the official mission briefing had ever alluded to such a thing. The Mustang was carrying something someone wanted hidden forever. And now, after 80 years of silence, it was beginning to surface. Asterisk, as the recovery team prepared for the final examination of the P-51 Mustang. Every artifact, every document, every fragment of bone, and every mysterious ingot was laid out on the inspection tables, illuminated under harsh, artificial lights that reflected off the polished metal like an eerie warning, and from the very first moment, it became terrifyingly clear that what they were holding had been deliberately erased from history. For the sealed metallic box contained a miniature mechanical device unlike anything the team had ever seen, a mechanism that combined elements of precision clockwork with unknown alloys, dials and coded inscriptions that hinted at encrypted wartime technology. Technology that had never been cataloged in any Allied or Axis records, and alongside it, the flight logs, when deciphered fully, revealed coordinates that led not to conventional airfields or military targets, but to underground bunkers, hidden laboratories, and secret depots deep behind enemy lines, suggesting that the Mustang's final mission had been a top-secret transfer operation. An extraction of something or someone so critical that both sides had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal it. And as the divers and historians pored over the evidence, forensic analysis of the cockpit and skeletons revealed chilling new truths. The second skeleton had been violently strained mid-flight. The trajectory of internal bullet damage confirmed a struggle between the pilot and an unknown assailant. And the positioning of the cockpit controls suggested a desperate, last-minute fight for control, one that ended with the aircraft plummeting into the river, ensuring that the secrets it carried would remain submerged for decades. Yet here they were, finally exposed to daylight. The ingots, once thought to be simple metal, were revealed to contain experimental alloys potentially linked to early attempts at high-energy propulsion, a project so advanced that it may have predated publicly known wartime technology by decades. And the notebook, painstakingly decoded, contains step-by-step instructions for the transportation of these materials under strict secrecy, including contingency plans for interception, sabotage, and recovery, which meant that the pilot of the Mustang had not simply flown a combat mission. He had been entrusted with one of the most clandestine operations of World War II, a mission so critical that its true nature had been deliberately suppressed in all surviving documentation. And as the final layer of evidence was examined, the cockpit itself, twisted and scorched yet remarkably intact, the team realized that every mechanical anomaly, every broken rivet, every bent control surface, had been exacerbated not by accident, but by deliberate design to conceal the precise nature of the cargo, the flight path, and the identities involved. And when they finally opened the last compartment, a hidden envelope containing microfilm emerged, depicting diagrams of underground complexes, experimental machinery, and coded references to scientific breakthroughs, each more advanced and improbable than the last, confirming that the Mustang had been part of a covert operation so extraordinary that it remained classified, suppressed, and almost mythical until now. The psychological weight of the discovery pressed on everyone present, for they were not just witnesses to a plane crash. They were observers of history deliberately hidden, a revelation that tied together mechanical ingenuity, wartime secrecy, betrayal, and survival, all intertwined in a single miraculous story. And as they reflected on the fate of the pilot, the unknown passenger, and the contents he carried, the final truth emerged with spine-chilling clarity. The Mustang had survived more than just enemy fire, and flak it had survived the impossible, preserving secrets that were never meant to resurface. And in this final hour, as the artifacts were cataloged, photographed and secured, the audience watching the unfolding story felt the full tension, suspense, and awe of a mission that transcended ordinary combat heroics, revealing the extraordinary courage, cunning, and sheer luck that allowed a single aircraft and its crew to carry secrets through perilous skies, into history, and finally into our eyes, leaving the viewer with the lasting impression that World War II still holds mysteries that defy imagination, and that sometimes the truth is far stranger, far more dangerous, and far more miraculous than any story ever told, ensuring maximum suspense, engagement, and historical astonishment from the first hook to this breathtaking conclusion.